how can we stop them from actually inflicting harm? And the answer is just what you just said. It's skills. So we need to practice the skills, but we also need to reduce the load they're carrying. Let's say you have an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old and they're fighting. Now, maybe you also have a 1-year-old in the family. And that 1-year-old takes a lot of time from the parents. Maybe dad's traveling on business. Maybe mom's there with 3 kids and one of them's a 1-year-old. That's a lot for any mom to handle. Does this ring a bell for you?
Absolutely. That is my life.
There you go.
Today's guest is someone who has helped transform the way thousands of parents approach discipline. Dr. Laura Markham is a clinical psychologist, parenting coach, and author of the best-selling book, Peaceful Parent, Happy Kids. Her work is rooted in the belief that children don't need to be punished to learn, and that connection, not control, is the real foundation of cooperation. She's here to help us break down what peaceful discipline actually looks like in the heat of the moment and how we can raise respectful, emotionally healthy kids without yelling, bribes, or threats. Laura, welcome to the podcast today. Thank you for joining me.
My pleasure.
Can you start off by telling the listeners today a little bit about yourself and the work that you do?
Well, I support parents to have better relationships with their kids and to raise children who are healthier emotionally. So my website is Peaceful Parent, Happy Kids. I have 3 books, Peaceful Parent, Happy Kids, Peaceful Parent, Happy Siblings is the next one, and Peaceful Parent, Happy Kids Workbook, which helps you solidify the skills that are recommended in the other 2 books.
Excellent. So let's start at the beginning then. What is peaceful discipline and how would you explain it in simple terms to a parent who's used to thinking in terms of, say, punishments and rewards?
So I don't like the word discipline. I know that it comes from the word guidance. The disciples of Jesus Christ were we know an early use of that word.
Yeah.
But if you look in the dictionary, it will tell you that that use is archaic. And that discipline actually means punishment. So I don't even like to talk about discipline. I like to talk about moving beyond discipline to loving guidance. Because what are we really trying to do here? We're trying to first raise children who will become adults who will have internalized the ability to manage their own actions so they can show up in accordance with their values. That's one thing. So it's all about self-management, emotional self-management. But then you also need the values. So it's how do we transfer our values to our kids? How do we influence our children to adopt the values that we think are the right values to have in life? There's a range of possible values out there, the things you value and the way you are in the world, right?
Yeah.
So if we're talking about discipline long-term, it's about self-management and it's about the values. If you're talking about discipline short term, it's about, no, you can't hit your brother. No, you can't throw your cup across the room. No, you can't run in the street, right? So it's about immediate cooperation. So what we know about punishment, which is what most people think of when they think of discipline, is when people think of it, they think, what threat can I use against my child at this moment? So they know something bad will come if they throw that cup or hit that brother or run in the street. But that assumes that your child has enough of a prefrontal cortex to stop themselves, first of all.
Right.
And it assumes that they will be motivated enough by that threat that they will then stop themselves. If they have the capacity, and second, will they actually be motivated by your threat? If your threat is something that is a pretty big deal, like, then they might pay attention to you. They might actually stop. But it's not going to work on crimes of punishment. If your kid hits his brother because he's got some long simmering resentments, that's not going to change because you threaten your child with no screen time later today, or with you're going to go sit on the naughty step, or pretty much any list of consequences or punishments because consequences are punishments. That's what they are. Any list you could come up with of threats is not going to be effective against a crime of passion. And most ways that children act out, at least young children, are crimes of passion, and their prefrontal cortex is not fully developed. So it's not that effective in the moment. We do know that threats can be effective in the moment if they're strong enough threats, but they're only effective immediately. And the child will repeat the same behavior 10 minutes later. So really, and so that's the immediate. And then later, is that influencing your child with the values you want them to have? If your value is that people who are bigger and stronger can use their power against smaller, more vulnerable people, if that's the value you want to promote, that's what you're promoting. I don't think that's the value we want. I think the value we want is when you hit someone else, it causes the other person pain. Is that the person you want to show up as? Right? I once asked my kids about this when they were teenagers, how they learned not to hit, for instance. I said, so you've never been punished. You've never had a timeout. You've never had a threat. You've never had a consequence. I said to my 2 teenagers, how did you learn to behave? And they were like, well, why wouldn't we learn to behave? Well, you told us how you wanted us to be, and you and Dad were always, so reasonable and considerate of us. And we wanted to cooperate with you. We wanted to show up as members of the family who were doing the right thing. I said, okay, but when you were little, like, how did you learn not to hit other people? And she said, she was 14 at the time. She said, well, kids will always learn not to hit other people. It's not acceptable in our society. The question is, do you not hit your brother because you're afraid of the retribution, the pain to you? Or do you not hit the other person because you don't want to cause them pain? So we're back to the values question. Our actions are going to transmit to our child, what's our value? Why is it that you don't hit your brother, right? And the child's hitting his brother or throwing his cup or running in the road because of something. It's not just coming out of nowhere. He's got either unmet needs or big feelings that he's not managing at the moment. If we can give the child help with the big feelings and the unmet needs, they aren't going to do those things anyway. So why would we use threats and punishment when it's our job as the parent to help them with the needs and feelings that are driving that behavior, right?
Yeah.
The final part, the first thing I mentioned is when they get older, will they have the internal self-control to not do these things? The way we get that internal self-control, it's neural wiring. Every time that our child willingly gives up something they want or something they want more, and not because we want it, but because they want it. Like, I want to hit my brother. He's driving me nuts, but I don't want to be that person.
Yeah.
Then I'm going to give that up. I'm developing the neural wiring for self-discipline. Then when I'm 14, I want to go off with my friends who just invited me to skip school today. Ooh, that looks exciting. But I don't want to be kicked off the soccer team, which would happen if I played hooky from school. So I'm going to exercise some self-control and not do that. So at each step of the way, our child is making a choice. And if the choice is, I want this thing, but there's something I want more that's more in accordance with my values or the things I want more, like I want my parents to not be disappointed in me. Every time the child makes that connection, they're building the neural wiring for self-discipline. That means that as they get older, when they're 18, when they're 28, they're going to make the right choices because they can manage their big emotions so that they can make the right choices. So everything I've just said, from the short term, in the moment, don't let him hit his brother, to the longer term development of values, to the longer term capacity to act in accordance with those values. Every one of those is better served by being the kind of parent who shows up and helps your kid with the emotions and the needs that drive them to bad behavior, in quotes, acting out behavior, we would call it.
Yeah.
And threatening them with consequences and punishment, it doesn't actually help. So that's a relic from like the 1600s. Why would we still be doing that? We know how to build better airplanes and better hospitals, and we know how to do better parenting.
Yes. I guess the problem that lies is a lot of people aren't necessarily thinking about the long term, are they? They're thinking about the in the moment discipline to try and get cooperation out of their child for what's happening. But when so clearly explained as you just have, actually, when we're looking at those values that we want to instill in our child and recognizing what's kind of realistic expectations, maybe age appropriate, where we can expect them to be, and understanding that really we need to help teach them develop the skills to cope in the moment rather than to punish and model behavior that we don't actually want to see from them. So why has there been so much debate around punishment and rewards? For parents who were raised with them, what's the actual problem and what should we aim for doing instead?
For parents who are raised with them, think about your own background. Think about whether you felt more equipped to be a good person when you were punished. You might have said, okay, I'm not going to hit my brother. I'm not going to throw my cup. Or when you got older, I'm not going to lie to my parents. You might have tried to be a good person, but you still had possibly the unmet needs and the big feelings that had driven you to act that way to begin with. And then if you don't get help with those, it doesn't help you to be a better person. Also, if what we want is a close relationship with our children, because that connection, that trust that we build with our child is what makes them want to please us, what makes them want to act good. It makes them want to not disappoint us, not lie to us, really come to us when they're having a hard time or when somebody bullies them or when something scares them. These are the things we want as parents. We want children to come to us so we can support them. That doesn't happen if we're punishing. So when you say, what's the debate? What should we do instead? Well, I think we should try to find a way to parent children that fosters emotional health and closeness between parent and child. Now, I'm not talking about closeness that precludes autonomy. Obviously, children need to grow up and test their wings and learn how to stand up for themselves and face their own problems and come up with solutions and gain confidence in life, resilience. That's all important. But sometimes things are big enough that we want them to come to us, like if they're getting bullied.
Yeah.
And we always want them to trust us. That doesn't happen when we're threatening. And, it may be okay when they're young, but as they get older, when you have a 12 or a 13 or a 14-year-old, they start to look for love in all the wrong places if they're not getting this, the understanding, the support at home. You can have kids in the teen years who will talk to you and ask you questions, even seek your advice and talk to you about things and argue with you over your rules. That's fine. But the point is teenagers who engage with you, or you can have teenagers who shut down, who slam out of the house, who don't tell you things, who lie straight to your face. That's not what any of us want.
No.
So when you think about what we want to be different, as I said, we know how to raise kids now, so they're a lot healthier. So why not do that? Why should they have to recover from their childhoods?
Absolutely. And I love that. I think, just like you say, we do know so much more now about how we can raise children so that they're not fearful of that punishment, and therefore they are more willing to come and speak to us. And exactly that, if we can practice that in those younger years, then we are going to create that in our teenagers at a time when it is harder to keep that connection strong.
Yes.
And that's ultimately what we want, isn't it? So that we can be a positive influence to them rather than them just turning to peer groups that might not be offering the right advice and guidance.
Absolutely.
So just explain to us a little bit more then about why connection does lead to cooperation so much more.
Okay. So first of all, if you had a boss who was always criticizing you and maybe raising their voice at you even and threatening you with some sort of repercussion if you didn't do it the right way, or you had a boss who was supportive of you and said, wow, I see why you did it that way. I understand. I'm not sure it's the best way to do it, but I certainly understand it. Let's figure this out together. And sounds like you were pretty upset about that. I hear that. Which boss would you want to have? And which boss would you be most influenced by? Which boss would you listen to? So that's connection, right? And, when I talked about my teenagers, my daughter, I told you what she said, how you learn not to hit. My son said, And he was already 18 by this conversation. He said, "Oh, I remember wanting to hit people, specifically her." And he points to his sister. He said, and I said, "But you didn't hit her." He said, "No, because every time I wanted to, I knew I could go tell you about it and you would help. I never needed to hit her because I had your support." So if I were the kind of parent who was threatening him and saying, "You be nice to your sister," he would not have felt he could come to me. Instead, he came to me and said, "She's driving me crazy. She just wrecked my tower. I feel like hitting her." And he could say all that. And I would say, "Of course you do. I understand. Let's figure out where you can build your tower without her wrecking it. No wonder she's driving you crazy." Right. So he felt connected. He trusted me to sort it out and help him solve the problem. But he also trusted me to understand that even though he felt like hitting her, he wasn't a bad person. So he never did hit her. Right. And I think that's the thing about connection. We don't need everything we want, but we do need to not be alone when we're children, to not be alone with those things that are so hard that we struggle with, those big feelings. We can't make everything easy for our kids, and we wouldn't really want to. We want them to face some hard things so they can build some strength, inner strength and resilience. But we do want them to know we're always there. And we do want them to know that we've got their back and that we love them no matter what. And the funny paradoxical thing here is when we love them no matter what, they don't want to disappoint us. They want to be because they will live up to our expectations or down to our expectations.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I think one of the things some parents worry about, though, isn't it, is they feel scared that if they don't punish, say their child has hit, they feel that if they don't punish, will their child get away with it? And they worry that they won't learn the lesson. And what would you say to that fear?
Well, is the lesson that if you hit another child, your brother or someone else, you will be punished and suffer some pain for that? Is that the lesson? Because we know, I mean, you look at studies of capital punishment and only about 10% of murders are premeditated. The others, knowing there's capital punishment, is not going to stop those murders. And this is adults. So when you have a child who does not have a fully developed prefrontal cortex, teaching the lesson by punishing them is not actually going to stop them from hitting again. But what might stop them from hitting again is what I just described. When the child can come to you and say, "Oh, I want to hit this kid, my sister or whoever." And you say, "Oh, of course you feel like that. And it's never okay to hit. Let's solve the problem." Right? If you help the child with the needs and the feelings that are driving the behavior, they won't need to indulge in the behavior. It's that simple. And parents might say to that, "Well, but I can't be there every minute." Understood. You can't be there every minute. You've got dinner to get on the table, or maybe it happens in the playground at school and you're not there. Certainly these things can happen. Your child can have these feelings and you're not there to help them. But the needs and the feelings that are causing your child to be that reactive, if you help the child with those, I call it preventive maintenance. If you connect with your child, if you empathize, if they feel understood, if they have regular one-on-one time with you so they feel seen and valued, if you get them laughing on a regular basis, which reduces the anxiety they carry, it literally changes the body chemistry. That kid is going to be in a healthier state. And then when they get taunted on the playground, they're not as likely to haul off and hit the other kid. They might want to, but they learned from you how to go to you and get help. And B, they don't feel at the end of their rope. Whereas if they're at home having constant power struggles with you, because that's what punishment does, it creates power struggles. You're not on the same team anymore. You're the police. So when you have constant power struggles at home, your child is building up anxiety and upset about that. And when the bully says something, taunts them, or whoever taunts them on the playground, they haul off and they sock the other kid because they're carrying around all that stuff that they haven't worked through. Whereas if they're connected with you, this stuff comes up and you help them through it on a daily basis. They laugh, they cry, they get it out of their system. And when they show up at school, they've got a lot more internal resource to handle whatever gets thrown at them, including the bully on the playground.
So what about when we put this towards those siblings? I know, just speaking of my own experience, I've got two boys and they can be quite competitive. it's quite a challenge sometimes to stop them taking out their aggression on each other. Again, I do my best to meet their needs. I do my best to make it clear that that's not how we react. And I don't actually use punishments myself. I try to do much more of the approach you're talking about, that I really want to help them build skills. So we'll spend a lot of time sort of problem solving and try and talk through it and get them to come up with the ideas themselves. And they're a lot more willing to sort of work with the idea. However, I do find we end up there again and again and again. What would be your advice to that?
Yes. So when you say we end up there, so where we end up is that kids have a not very well-developed prefrontal cortex and big feelings, right?
Yeah.
That's where we end up. So the question is, what can we do so that in that moment, when this kid is outraged at the sibling, even though they've got big feelings and a not very well-developed prefrontal cortex, how can we stop them from actually inflicting harm? And the answer is just what you just said. It's skills. So we need to practice the skills, but we also need to reduce the load they're carrying. So for instance, let's say you have an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old and they're fighting. Now, maybe you also have a 1-year-old in the family. And that 1-year-old takes a lot of time from the parents. Maybe dad's traveling on business. Maybe mom's there with 3 kids and one of them's a 1-year-old. That's a lot for any mom to handle. Does this ring a bell for you?
Absolutely. That is my life.
There you go. So it's also a lot for the 5-year-old and the 8-year-old. The 8-year-old, it's like, it's hard enough to have the first one come along, but now there's a baby. Oh my gosh. Even if the baby's adorable and the 8-year-old loves the baby, there's still going to be some like, oh, I have to do this too. And I don't get mom to myself. And for the 5-year-old who's been displaced, we know there's various times that are really hard for that 5-year-old. One is at the initial time of the birth, but also around 9 months when the baby is so cute and is crawling, around 1 year when the baby is starting to climb onto things and knock down the tower. So it's a lot of stress on the older kids. So again, I'm going to go back to preventive maintenance. I know you are focused today as discipline, but discipline guidance by itself is not sufficient. We have to help with the needs and the feelings that are driving the behavior. All behavior comes from needs and feelings, right?
Yeah.
So, I mentioned one-on-one time. When you have a 1-year-old, you don't have a lot of one-on-one time for the 5-year-old and the 8-year-old, but they still need it, right? They still need something. So figuring out if there's a way that they can get that one-on-one time to know that even though they're not the only child in your orbit, they are uniquely themselves to you, and you couldn't love anyone more than you love them. That's really important. Otherwise, they end up with a chip on their shoulder, and they're like, all right, my brother is annoying me. I'm going to haul off and hit him, right?
Yeah.
Second thing they need laughter, because laughter, as I said, diminishes the anxiety they carry around. Anxiety is another word for fear. And what does a child feel when mom has a new baby, even a year-old baby? Some fear that maybe mom loves the baby more. So all kids, all humans have fear. And if we can't process it at the moment, we're carrying it around, emotional backpack. So laughing is what lets that fear out. It just evaporates then. If you don't get to laugh, you'll need to cry. If you don't get to cry, and 8-year-old boys are not famous for crying. So if you don't get to cry, you can build up some anger. So 8-year-old boys actually, and 5-year-old boys need to cry. And how might they cry? Well, when they get angry, to be able to say, oh, sweetie, I see why you're so mad. So you don't go on the attack back, even if they're screaming, I hate him. I wish I never had a brother. You're saying, you're pretty upset at your brother. I see why. Sometimes. And then you say, after you've totally empathized, then you say, and you know, your brother's part of our family. He's not going anywhere. And at that point, because you've been so understanding, your child might start to tear up. They're not going to weep if they're 8. They may not weep if they're 5, but they are going to tear up and soften a little bit. And that's what makes the difference in them. They're grieving because there's a certain amount of grief that kids have to go through to let go of all kinds of things. Let go of being the only child or the only 2 children, to let go of getting their way, to let go of how come the 5-year-old always gets what he wants and I never get what I want. Once they grieve, they can let go and move on. But until they do, they're going to defend against that grief with anger. And that, when you said, how can we get back to that point over and over again? They need some help with the needs and the feelings that are driving the behavior. And one of those needs is likely to be that they need to do a little grieving.
Yeah.
So the preventive maintenance that I'm describing takes care of all of that. You laugh, and if they laugh enough, they may cry some.
Yeah.
Right. You empathize basically 24/7. You're empathizing no matter what. You're still saying like, your brother's not going anywhere. No, you can't hit your brother no matter what.
Yeah.
You need to figure out a way to make things better with your brother. So we're not punishing, but we're also not letting them get away with it in a sense, that sense of, we're saying we need to make things better. We can't just hit the people we love or anyone else and then go on with our lives. We need to make a repair. So there's no punishment, but there is an expected repair to make things better, which is very important for the child to redeem themselves. In the same way that we do the hard thing and apologize if we lose it at our kids, and then we feel better about ourselves. It's actually an important part of our redemption so we can forgive ourselves and go on. So the child does need to make a repair. So when you say, how can we keep getting back here? What can we do?
Yeah.
We're helping with the needs and feelings. We're doing the preventive maintenance to help with all those needs and feelings. We're also teaching them at the moment, just as you're already doing, and we're expecting a repair and supporting them to do it in a very non-punitive way. But of course, this is what we do. Just like we brush our teeth at night, we also make repairs because we mess up, oops, the milk spilled. Okay, we'll clean up the milk. We're not going to punish anyone for spilling the milk. We clean it up. Here's the sponge. I'll get the paper towels. Don't worry, I'll help. Yeah. Now you need to repair with your brother. Don't worry, I'll help. But your responsibility is to make a repair and clean up the mess.
And I love the way you've just put that, actually. And I think when you take that to your adult relationships, sometimes you can almost see it a little bit clearer in the sense that I know if my husband was to punish me for burning dinner, it wouldn't inspire me to cook dinner better tomorrow night. I would feel so resentful and so hurt and so angry that he hasn't understood that my day has been about the kids and I've been overwhelmed and I got distracted with the 1-year-old, which is why I burnt the dinner.
Yes.
Exactly what you're saying. If we understand the feelings and we listen to that and we empathize and we really do that connect before we try and redirect, I think that's a real key point there, isn't it? That I really need to stay focused on with my children for sure.
I love your analogy to what would happen with you and your husband. I think in general, it's such a great reframe for us to look at, if I were really upset and it made me do something like hurl a cup across the room, which I did as a young adult, right? And broke my favorite mug. Would that require punishment, or would somebody say, oh my goodness, you're having such a hard time?
Yeah.
How can I help?
Yeah, offer a hug and listen. And then you would have those tears, wouldn't you? You'd let all that emotion out and you would feel so much better that someone showed up for you.
Yes.
Yeah. It's powerful. I find it interesting how we don't historically look at our children in the same lens that we would have done our adult relationships.
Yes.
And for me, I know whenever I'm struggling with the kids, I do try and look at it as an analogy as to how would I feel as an adult, or how would this work in the relationship with my husband? And it very much sort of keeps me more on track of to keep that connection high.
Yes. Beautiful.
So if a parent has grown up, with shouting, threats and smacking, it can sometimes be their automatic response. How do they begin to parent differently, to break those cycles?
Yeah. It can feel really hard. And it is, in fact, really hard. But I've seen thousands of parents do it. So the first thing to do is to state your intention to your kids, because they're your accountability partners. They're the only ones who will know if you're using a respectful voice. Yeah. And I suggest that parents actually make a chart, because life is so full with kids. We get overwhelmed. It's hard to remember, but that way you'll see progress. And I suggest you break you can print out a free chart from my website, peacefulparenthappykids.com. You can also just use your calendar, but divide it into morning and afternoon, because it's hard not to shout all day if you've been raised with shouting and you're used to shouting. And let your kids give you a star for, the morning or the afternoon, or both. Or maybe neither. Sometimes you can go a week and not get a star morning or afternoon the whole week. But rather than losing confidence, instead look at what got in your way. Keep a little log. Just write down. Yelled when I was trying to get them to bed and they wouldn't settle down. yelled when we were trying to get out of the house in the morning and he couldn't find his shoe. Look at what's happening and then take a breath, give yourself all the forgiveness in the world because you came by this honestly by being raised this way yourself and you're doing the hard work to change it. You don't have to be perfect. You're headed in the right direction. So look at bedtime. If that's when you lose it, many parents lose it at bedtime. What can you do differently at bedtime? How can you give yourself more inner resource as you head into bedtime? Sometimes just being aware of it is the place you always stumble will really do it. Then in the moment, so that can help totally. But in the moment, you're going to find yourself shouting. It's just going to happen.
Yeah.
So I say the minute you notice yourself doing it, whether because your kid is looking at you sort of stricken or whether because you just notice you're screaming and they're ignoring you, whatever, and you're ready to start smacking because you don't know what to do. The minute you notice it, stop, take a deep breath. I call it stop, drop, breathe. Stop, drop the agenda. The agenda is bedtime, I know, but if you're trying to stop shouting and you're trying to get kids to bed on time, you can't do both. So start bedtime a little bit earlier, like half an hour earlier. So you have a little wiggle room. So stop, drop your agenda just for that moment. It's bedtime, but drop it. Take a deep breath. What that does is it moves you out of fight, flight, or freeze. Because you wouldn't be stopping to take a deep breath if there was a tiger or a robber, right? You're in fight, flight, or freeze because it's a state of emergency. But it's your 3-year-old, it's not a state of emergency. So take the deep breath, take a few deep breaths, and then talk yourself off the cliff. You need something you can say that's going to affect you. So think of it in advance and put it on a little sticky note and put it somewhere in your house, like, in the bathroom, in the kids' bedroom, on the doors, all over. And it can say something like, this isn't an emergency, right? Yeah. I can handle this. Whatever's going to help you to recover at this moment.
Yeah.
Of course it's hard. I mean, one thing that I tell parents is, of course it's hard. Give yourself that forgiveness. It's going to be hard because you're doing a really hard thing. Yeah. And then you start over. You do a do-over. You go back. You've just stopped yelling. You've calmed yourself down a little bit. You've forgiven yourself. You've talked yourself off the cliff. You promise yourself like, okay, once I get them to bed, I'm going to go take a nice hot bath. You do promise yourself whatever is going to be great for you. And then you go do a do-over. You go to your kid and you say, I'm sorry I was yelling. It's time to brush your teeth now, or whatever it's time for. It's time, some parents will say, I need you to brush your teeth. It depends on your unique child, but that's not as effective usually as it's time, because that sort of sets up a power struggle. Yeah, I need you to do something. I don't want to do this thing. But just, it's time to brush your teeth now. Let's go. Come on. And you're bringing a sense of humor with you. Maybe you're slinging them across your shoulder. You're doing whatever you're doing, but you're trying to bring connection into it, because your kids will do almost anything for connection. They will follow leadership. When you exhibit leadership to me is calm, warm, supportive authority. And when you radiate that, kids will pivot to you and they will follow you. When you're the victim, when you're the yeller, they're not going to follow you.
No. It's so true. It's kind of creating that positive influence, isn't it? That they want to follow, that they want to please. Yes. And I love what you kind of said there. I know I'm very guilty of this sometimes. I think it was Daniel Siegel who said about turn down the shark music in your head when you're attending to the moment. And I will sometimes do that. I'll hear the kids scream and I'll go running in. And I think I'm bringing the fire here, actually, a lot more than they are. Because there's, as you say, I've gone into fight or flight and there is no fire. And I have to really take that conscious pause to remind myself that actually it's just my two kids arguing and there's nothing terrible happening. We can sort this. But in that moment, I'm kind of flooded and I'm not thinking straight. And I will kind of come running into the situation and just make it worse, really, unless I stop and take that breath and remind myself that, again, I need to make that connection before I can redirect them to a better place here.
I love what you just said about shark music, because so often, you asked, why is connection so powerful? Why does that get kids cooperating? Imagine if we're dysregulated and we're shouting. Yeah. What does that do to the child's nervous system? The child doesn't feel safe. Talk about shark music. They're like, there's a dysregulated adult. By definition, that means this person could do something unpredictable. They could even hurt me. That's scary to me. I'm going to certainly not cooperate. I'm going to be out for number one here and keep myself safe. And I'm going to be defiant and right. Whereas imagine instead, we're able to calm ourselves down, get rid of the shark music, as you say, remind ourselves it's not an emergency, even return ourselves to a state of well-being. And then we show up and we do a do-over with our kid. Now the kid's like, wow, I like this grown-up. This is my mom or dad, the person I adore, who takes good care of me. And they're right here being so lovely to me. And I want to be lovely with them. And I want that good feeling. And of course, I'm going to do anything they ask. Where's the toothbrush? Yeah.
It's powerful, isn't it? It's not always easy to do in the moment, but it is powerful. And I love that. And I love that for our children and this more respectful way of raising human beings now.
Yeah.
Laura, you have given so much wonderful advice in this podcast. Do you have any final words for the listeners today?
I would just give a little encouragement. If you're listening to us talk and you're thinking, this wouldn't work with my kid, this wouldn't work for me, I just open my mouth and I'm yelling, this is the way I was raised, it would just be too hard. I would say every step in the right direction is going to get you further on a path toward a whole new landscape. You don't have to be perfect. Just keep giving yourself support to do your best. It doesn't actually help to say, I'm going to do better tomorrow. What really helps is to say, I had a hard time today because I didn't get enough sleep last night. Today, I'm going to try to get enough sleep. Give yourself the support you need because you're doing the hardest work in the world, parenting, and you deserve all the support you can give yourself. And only when you have that support can you show up with well-being as the person you want to be.
I love that. And I think that is absolute sound advice there to end the podcast on. Thank you, Laura. You really have covered everything about sort of punishments, timeouts, and how better ways we can do that with our children. And I think there's a lot of people that would be really interested to listen to this approach in this podcast. So thank you for your time this evening.
My pleasure.